Hi Booktube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads. The books I'm discussing today are Romanian author Mircea Cartarescu's Blinding, translated by Sean Cotter. Georges-Louis Borges short story collection called Fictions, translated by Andrew Hurley. This is made up of The Garden of Forking Paths and Artifices, two smaller collections. The Birdcatcher by American author Gayle Jones. And finally High Life by Matthew Stokoe, who's a British author, but I don't know about his other books, but this is very much set in America and written as if by an American, but we'll come to that. So I'm going to start with Blinding, the Romanian novel. So I first saw and heard about this on Celia's channel, and I will post a link to the video in which she brings it up, where it's one of her top 5 reads of either the last couple of years or all time. I'm not quite sure, but definitely one of her recent favourites. And I seem to have read quite a lot of books set in around Middle Europe, but written by Middle European authors and authors from former Soviet states, possibly prompted by the Ukrainian conflict. And this is very good in terms of being well written, but I did have one or two problems with it. So the main character is a writer, or a would-be writer, although he's really struggling with that, in communist Romania. But he's really detailing his childhood in part 1, where he's basically looking out the window of his bedroom, and he's got his feet up against a boiling hot radiator that sort of burns them. And he's looking at the skyline of Bucharest as it's changing from, the sort of old 19th century and sort of the architecture of the sort of when Romania was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the much more sort of practical, prosaic, new builder under state socialism or communism of sort of high-rise, cheaply thrown up apartment buildings and things like that. So he on one level, there's a lot of description in part 1 of this book, and it's very, very well done. So on the one level, there's sort of what he sees out of his window, but he also has two other sort of realms of perception. One is hallucination, where he's hallucinating things as well on top of what he's seeing, and also dreams when he's in bed asleep. Now, normally I have a fairly low threshold of tolerance for both hallucinatory writing and dream writing, particularly dream writing, which I find very self-indulgent. But because it's been deliberately set up by the author as part of this sort of three-way levels of his perception, it actually works. So there are an awful lot of descriptions of statues in Bucharest, both real and imagined, in dreamscapes and hallucinatory scapes. There's lots of tombs and underground stairways and tunnels that he traverses. And I do like the way he delivers the architecture of Bucharest and then extends that out into these sort of dreamscapes. But they do sort of come back on themselves and repeat a bit. How many sort of stairways underground can you have, and tombs and things like that. It did get a bit much in places. And the other thing is he's quite sort of sexually hung up. And there was definitely a thing about this book of being a sort of another sort of white male author obsessing about his genitalia, which I think I've done to death as a reader. Really, it's a bit tiresome, but it's not just it's not only that. As I say, there is a lot to recommend it. Part 2 is more the story of his mother and her sister when they're young women in wartime Romania, with Romania being allied with the Nazis. So Bucharest was a fairly free city. I don't think it was formally occupied by the Germans. And indeed, they sort of make the acquaintance of a jazz musician, a black jazz musician who's originally from New Orleans. And also they're sort of, she's not quite an aristocrat, but she's someone who sort of just carves a path through the Bucharest. She's very, very influential, and she takes the two sisters under her wing. Now this was, again, I enjoyed this, but I will say that the black musician was kind of a bit sort of join the dots representation of, New Orleans, voodoo, jazz, Whereas when the writer is sticking to Bucharest, which is what he has personally lived through, it read a little more A, authentic, but B, with more depth than this rather sort of slightly stereotypical jazz musician, I felt. And then part three is a sort of trying to knit them all together, both parts of the mother and the jazz musician and this writer. And it doesn't say here, but this is part one in a trilogy. So it's not sort of fully resolved by the end, but there is enough resolution to keep you driving through the book. And I'm not sure really whether there was quite enough to make me want to read parts 2 and 3. It's quite a dense read. It's enjoyable, but there was something that just didn't drive me on particularly about it. There's lots of beautifully written passages. The ambience of the book actually reminded me of Elias Canetti's Auto da Fe, the sort of feeling and atmosphere of that. Very much a Middle Europe book, as was this. But part 3 with this resolution, and I don't want to talk about sort of what direction it heads off on because that would be a spoiler, but that reminded me of the leap that Houellebecq's novel Atomised takes, whereby Atomised and this book have proceeded apace on, even though this book involves sort of hallucinatory landscapes and dreamscapes. It is basically rooted in a real city of Bucharest and a certain level of realism, as was Atomised. But then both books sort of take off at the end into this sort of amazing, sort of mind-blowing supposition of what life and existence, humanity, it sort of gets much more sort of philosophical and metaphysical. This, as I say, this does it as well as I feel Atomised did it, and that was kind of interesting. But again, because it's sort of rooted back in the New Orleans part, overall it didn't quite bite for me. But all in all, a pretty interesting read. I mean, I think you've got to be committed to want to read it because of its sort of size and density. I'll give it 4 stars. And on to Fictions by Borges. Now, this has been in my book collection for many, many years, and I assume that I read it once, and I couldn't remember a blasted thing about it. So when Zena over at Beating Around the Book suggested we buddy read it, that's what we've been doing basically over September. And I don't want to say anything about it now because she and I are proposing to do a discussion video on BookTube. Whether we both post it or one of us posts it. At the moment we're struggling to find a date to even record it, so we're not there yet. So I'm not going to talk about this today, but I gave it 4 stars. And on to The Birdcatcher by Gayle Jones, an author I'd never heard of, but partly because she's been out of circulation for 20 years. She's sort of dropped out of literary circles. But she's now back with a vengeance, and I think releasing quite a few books. So she's obviously been writing in those 20 years. She just hasn't been publishing. And I first saw this on Eric Lenson Reader's channel, and it sounded interesting. I'm totally bemused by this book. I just didn't know what to make of it at all. It's perfectly well written. I should say what it's about, I suppose. So there's a couple, Catherine and Ernest. Catherine is an artist. And Ernest, I can't remember exactly what his job is, but basically it's something like marketing or advertising, something like that. And she's repeatedly trying to kill him. It's never really explained why. It's never explained why he stays with her, why he puts up with it, other than some notion of he loves her, of course. And then there's a third wheel in this, who is sort of the narrator, who's a writer called Amanda Wordlaw, who is a deep intimate of the pair of them. I don't mean sexually, although there's a bit of tension, but sexual tension between Ernest and her. In a way, she's sort of a witness come referee between them. And every time, so Catherine has been stripped of anything that could be dangerous. She's now only allowed to work in certain materials. She can't use glass and metal and stuff that could be used to attack her husband. Every time she does attack him, she gets confined to an asylum, but her husband always bails her out after a time because he knows she cannot create her art in the asylum, that she has to be free and out to do it. And the witness to all of this, as I say, the character Amanda, both the other two, Catherine and Ernest, sort of say how little she reveals herself, how little they know about her. And that's true, and that makes her a very bad person to be witnessing and attesting this to us. She's not a great narrator in terms of throwing light on everything. So there's lots of quite short chapters, and some of them are very interesting in a scene that it portrays or an emotion that it captures, but it doesn't knit together at all. Even the ending, when the point of view has changed from third person to first, still through the eyes of Amanda, we get a bit more insight into her personal story. There is a fourth character who is another artist called Gillette, who has dropped out of the art scene for 20 years and is now back, so presumably there's some echoes with Gayle Jones's own status within that. And she may or may not have killed her own daughter. As I say, utterly bemused. I don't know what I'm supposed to make of this. There are interesting bits in isolation, but it doesn't hang together as a novel at all. It doesn't explain itself in any manner of why we should read these characters, why we should be interested in them, because they don't reveal themselves or they aren't revealed by the author. So I gave it 3 stars because the writing is very good. But I don't think I'm in a rush to pick up another Gayle Jones novel, because ultimately I got very little out of this, I'm afraid. And finally, on to High Life by Matthew Stokoe. So he's a British writer, now resident in Australia. But this book is absolutely set in the world of California, where he did spend some time living. And this reads absolutely authentically as an American noir or California noir novel. So we have Jack, who is a fame hound. He's moved to California to be famous, to be an actor, and has ended up, like so many, working in Dunkin' Donuts. Not actually Dunkin' Donuts, but a donut joint. And he's almost sort of existentially sick because he can't live his dream, or he's failed to aspire to his dream. He's married to a prostitute. And the book opens with him coming across the dead body of his wife, who has been eviscerated. She had all her internal organs removed, and an identifying tattoo has been removed. And I think people of sensitive stomachs would find that quite tough as it's described, but believe me, that's the baseline for this. Everything gets a whole hell of a lot worse in terms of depravity. Perversion, we have necrophilia, we have live snuff, we have incest, we have paedophilia, or at least underage sex, and there's so much of it. So this notionally is a noir novel, but actually the noir elements percolate, the sex scenes effectively. I say sex scenes, they're exploitational sex scenes. All the characters are completely jaded in their appetites, and they need more and more extreme hits through sex. But even that doesn't seem to sort of satisfy them. They're sort of beyond sociopaths, really. They just, nothing seems to get to them at all. And they don't have emotions, which makes them very poor company through the course of the book. So there are 4 characters. There's Jack. There's a 50-year-old policeman with a heart condition who's actually only works in Vice, but he's shaking Jack down because he wants to find out who killed Jack's wife. And I guess the reason why. Not great when a thriller writer, you get ahead of them in terms of what they reveal, and you're there a long time before them. And the dialogue between them is really clunky. You've seen it on 1,000 films, cop films. It's not great noirish dialogue. The other 2 characters are, one is this sort of femme fatale that Jack falls in love with, and she's the one with the most perverted appetites of everyone. And her father, who is also obviously perverted and incestuous. They have an incestuous relationship. It reminded me of Robert Coover's book Lucky Pierre, in that it's a satire. It's a satire on Hollywood fame and glamour and stuff, because Jack can only get his rocks off by mixing in police crime scene photos of dead bodies with actual adverts of people who've made it famous, famous actors and things. He's sort of cutting between one to the other. I think that's the satirical element. But the thing about Lucky Pierre is, which is a satire of the pornographic industry, and I think this is a satire of Hollywood and Hollywood values. But it gets very boring. That's sexy enough to sex, even though both in Lucky Pierre and this, each scene ups what's come previously. It just gets very, very boring. And that at least had the excuse of, well, it was set in the pornographic industry, in the porn industry. This is supposed to be a noir thriller, and as I say, the noir elements are very much relegated to second place behind the perversion stuff. The other book it reminded me, of course, is Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. Again, a satire of American consumerism, but I found that book incredibly tedious, very boring, very repetitive. Again, and this falls foul of the same thing, I feel. There's just nothing to recommend this book. And I will say that the violence on a surface level is dealt out equally to anybody who literally gets in the way. But actually, push comes to shove, it's played out on the bodies of women far more extremely than it ever is on the bodies of men. Yes, there are men who suffer in here, but the violence done to women in here is far, far worse, 1,000 times. And I find that offensive. If you want to just have a sort of blatter, gore book, which this sort of is, by all means, if that's your shtick. But ultimately, I think he betrays and reveals his own psyche with the loving care or the hating care devoted to the violence played out on female flesh than it is on male flesh. This book had no redeeming features, and I've actually got a chart of reactions and taste, because what I wanted to do is try and put myself in the head as a writer of what this book was trying to achieve, and to do that I've drawn up this little sort of matrix of reactions. So I think he wants to test the author's appetite for disgusting, dark desires, and he wants to see what our reaction is. Will we be excited by the shocking material, or will we be nauseated? I'm not sure that I find that convincing, because to me, as I say, rather than shocking, I just found it boring. I think he wants to go from shocking excited or shocking nauseating, but what he actually gets is boring nauseating. So I think he fails on this sort of reaction matrix. And it reminded me of Dennis Cooper, and I've only read one Dennis Cooper book called Period, and I felt within that, which has similar sort of, it's a much shorter book than this, but it has similar sort of depraved desires, but I felt that Cooper was genuinely trying to find and establish and probe what are the boundaries of transgressive behaviour. Where do you go too far? And I don't think there was any of that. I think this is just splatter gore for shock value, and as a provocation, but without any heart to it. And in a way, the character Jack, he finds his limit, even though he can't feel anything, and he too goes from looking at pictures of dead people to actual necrophilia. He finds a limit, somewhat ironically, given what he's done, that even he can't abide in, as portrayed by one of the other characters. I also guessed who the murderer of his wife was. Again, you only had three possible people it could be. Jack himself, who was ruled out fairly quickly, and then this femme fatale and her father. It can only be one of those two. So again, there's not a great sort of tension of mystery of who did it. It was one or the other, effectively. And I guessed. Once I was given the red herring of basically one of them being accused of it with evidence, then I knew it was the other one, that was bogus, that they'd been set up by the other one. So yeah, even Jack reached a point, but because he'd had no feelings up to that point, I just didn't buy it. You know, why was he and the cop, who are so depraved in their own lives, why do they have this sort of deep sentimental loyalty and love of the woman who was murdered? It wasn't a happy marriage for Jack. They were on the verge of splitting up anyway. And yet it motivates what little positive emotional drive they have, other than depraved emotional drives. It was the only thing that motivated it, but it just got swamped as incredulous when all the sort of perverted things that they do. So yeah, an absolute horrendous read, really. So I gave it 1 star, which is the second 1 star I've given to fiction this year. The other was also by a British author, male author, called Patrick McGrath, called Asylum. That was offensive in its sort of representation of women, but the violence wasn't overt. It was just, I felt a lot of decisions that Patrick McGrath made as an author were just wrong. So it offended my outlook on life, not my morality, but just, I suppose, my belief system, my value system, I suppose. Whereas this and its violence, you know, I mean, I suppose it, you know, people could charge me being a moral prude. I don't think I'm a moral prude. I mean, I've written a play about an embryo or a fetus addicted in utero, and portrayed that on stage. So, you know, I like pushing the boundaries myself, but I think you have to have a good reason, and I couldn't see any reason at all in this. So yeah, 1 star. And if you bear in mind that I hadn't given 1 star to a work of fiction for at least 5-6 years since I joined BookTube, and this year I've given 2, so I don't know what that says. So yeah, that was my recent reads. Not great, to be honest. What I'm currently reading some Cesar Vallejo poetry. He was a Peruvian poet. Found himself in Europe, in Madrid and Paris, and in the Spanish Civil War. Although he was a journalist, he wasn't fighting, but he was a communist as well. So I'm reading some of his poetry. And this Wolfgang Houellebecq, which is a buddy read with Zena, and this is fantastic. I will finish this weekend. It's my 4th Houellebecq book. The other 3 have all been novellas. This is a proper novel, and you can see from the dog-eared that, you know, there's lots of stuff I sort of want to go back and read again in this. This is wonderful. It's about a state surveillance Stasi officer in East Germany, and yeah, I'll talk about it when I finished. So that's it. I'm waiting on a Georges Perec delivery. I have a real hankering to get back to him, although I think I'm beginning to run out of the books of his that I want to read. What I've ordered are his first 2 novels joined together in one. And I think that's it for now. So till next time, thanks very much.